1999 The Podcast is a production of the Cage Club Podcast Network. For more podcasts on movies, comics, and all things pop culture, head to cageclub.me. To contact us with questions, comments, or just to say hi, send us an email at 1999@cageclub.me. You can find me on Twitter at probablyrealjb and Joey at Soulpot. And you can follow the show on Twitter at 1999 The Podcast. To support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. The show is written, produced, and edited by us. Welcome to 1999 The Podcast, our anniversary episode, and we are here with a special guest, and we're going to talk about who that is in a second. Joey, happy 1 year anniversary.
It feels like just last year we started this. I still think it's a good idea to advance the movies that we do by a year every calendar year we go, but, you know, I'm outvoted 1-1.
I understand. No, I can't believe it's been a year. It's a year has flown by. A lot of stuff's happened in the year, but it has been a fun and quick year, and thank you all for being with us. And we thought we would do something fun and interesting for our 1 year anniversary and talk to. So one of the things that you know as a fact from listening to this podcast is that there has never been, nor shall there ever be,
Correct.
Another podcast ever about the year 1999.
We are the only one. I have been told by Apple reviews that are all glowing that we are the only one that we have all the reason in the world to exist, that no one has ever covered this topic before, that we are pioneers in the space, that no one's ever actually even had a film podcast before. And I don't know where you're going with this, because as far as I'm concerned, we're the only ones anywhere near this topic.
Well, I thought to myself, like, what if there were things happening that year that weren't movies? And what if someone did a podcast about that? And would that count? And weren't only movies, let's say. And it turns out
There was?
someone did. Yeah, there was. And the host and writer and mastermind of that there podcast, Dahlia, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm so good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
We're great. It's nice to talk to a kindred 1999 spirit.
Yes, it's a deep connection.
It is a very deep connection. We are, as we just established, few and far between, the only three people in the world who've even heard of this year. Well, except for our listeners, of course, who now know about it. Your podcast is called 1999 Forever, because it is the year that never ends.
Yeah.
Because we are just living in some sort of continued 1999 space, as The Matrix rightly predicted we would, forever and ever and ever. All right, let's talk about your show.
I like that our anniversary show is about her show. Like, I think that's wonderful.
I think it's a celebration of the year.
By completely
That's
deflecting.
generous.
Yes.
We're going to talk about us later on, but let's talk about yours show. So you also find this year intriguing enough to have done a podcast series about the year. You're sitting in your bedroom one night and you're like, man, 99, what a year.
Yeah.
It's basically how you introduce it, right? Yeah. So give a better story than the one I just told.
Yeah. Well, like so many people during quarantine, I found myself sitting around in my bedroom a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just a 90s girl in general. So I was listening to 90s music and thinking about 90s things, as one does. And I started just sort of like collecting in my mind, like, oh, I forgot that Britney Spears' first album came out in 1999. I saw a documentary about Woodstock 99. That's so wild that happened. And I was like, why don't I just for fun write like a timeline on like a big piece of cardboard and see how many like wild things I can get that happened in 1999. And I really did that. And it was wild. It's like, as you both know, as everyone listening knows, it's like the Blair Witch Project, The Matrix, Fight Club, Eyes Wide Shut. And then, of course, like Y2K is lingering over all of that. Like, what's going to happen? Is there even going to be a year 2000? And I just felt like I wanted to write something about it and make something about it. And I thought, uh, if I made it myself as a podcast, I could do how I wanted to do it and talk about what I was curious about and try to do some like mixed media and sort of quote from things in a different way. And so I found myself still alone in my apartment, but now making a podcast about 1999.
I'm wondering, is your background like what is your? Because I've listened to maybe half of it. I listened to the first 4 episodes, so I have not listened to the full series, but I listened to the first 4. Like, what is your background? Are you like a podcaster, creator, or writer by nature? Is this something that like was outside of your comfort zone? Like, where did like I totally understand, and especially the framing that you put in the first 4 episodes about why the year means so much to you, and like what you just said as well. But what is your background in terms of like, before you began on this creative endeavor, where were you coming from? Is this like in line with what you do? Is this out of line with what you do?
I think of myself as a writer, but I had worked at a magazine. I've worked at a few magazines, and I had a podcast at Bitch magazine called Back Talk for a few years, which was like a response to pop culture kind of talking about movies and sort of kind of the seeds of 1999 forever, like pop culture, but through a sort of post-feminist lens. Um, and I sort of, like so many people, got interrupted in that with COVID, and I sort of thought, like, what does this kind of podcasting even matter anymore? Like, what can I do that matters? And I really felt like writing was like the only thing that was helping me feel better, was helping me feel like a connection to other people around me. And so I was like, I would like, yeah, like maybe the best thing for me, mental health wise and like creative wise, is like I had never produced a podcast before. I had only like talked and sort of lightly edited one before. But I was like, I have all this alone time. I'm in my apartment. With my cat who's only a little noisy. And so I gave myself this project. Like it was like during COVID, people were like, this is the year I'm going to write a novel. And I was like, well, maybe I can't, I wish, but maybe this is the year that I can write, like 9 little essays and record them and sort of just, put them out there myself. And yeah, and I wanted to accomplish something during COVID time, and it felt really meaningful and it felt fun and it felt exciting. And so, yeah, I just gave myself that challenge because I had the opportunity.
One thing, and I'm curious if you've done it, because I don't think John and I have covered, and John more so because he's older than I am by a lot and remembers more about the year and actually like lived the year, as opposed to like you're more my age. And so like I was like alive and aware, but like not really doing things because I was still 12, right? So like, or 11. What was I? I turned 12 at the end of the year. Okay, yeah. Figured that out. But one thing I realized that we have not really covered, even though, John, you've covered a lot of things, like both that are mentioned in Dahlia's podcast, but also just in general in terms of like other cultural events and other media. But like, I was thinking your podcast sort of inspired me in not talking about it, in thinking about it, but like video games in 99, I feel like were kind of a big deal. And I'm wondering if you ever got that, because I was thinking about like the Dreamcast came out on 9/9/99, which is a very, very cool date. And that was the first one with an actual like internet port. And like that sort of changed things. Like that console flopped, but it, mattered. And I was looking on Wiki of like the video games that came out that year, and like Soul Calibur, which is one of the highest rated games of all time, Final Fantasy VIII, maybe Ocarina of Time, maybe just the American one. But like there's a lot of like huge, it was listed at 2 random ass publications have it as their game of the year, so I don't know.
Okay,
who knows? But like, there's a lot of games that like are transcendent, and I'm wondering if you ever dabbled into that. If that's not something that you're interested in, like you sort of steered clear. But like, that's a topic that we have not brought up. That I was playing more video games than anything else. Like I was playing more video games than watching movies or TV in 99. And like, I just didn't think about that within the context of the podcast. Like, is that something that you're personally interested in? Do you get to that on the podcast? Did you think about doing that?
That's fascinating. I mean, one thing I sort of had to grapple with really quickly was like, oh, you cannot get to everything, and you're just going to have to let go of the idea that you can get to everything. This is funny. I was not allowed to play video games by my parents. So that's like definitely a huge blind spot for me. I do remember that I was making sure, like, sort of like in my mind, like, let me make sure that like Sega didn't drop anything like huge, or like there wasn't like an Atari thing in 1999. But no, like I didn't even think about the idea of like, and that's like so smart too, thinking about like how much like I'm thinking of like The Last of Us, which is of course based on a video game. Like it's so much like the narrative future. I bet there's like a lot of really interesting seeds of that.
I do like that you say you weren't allowed to play video games, and yet you mentioned in the episode that you saw American Beauty in theaters with your parents, which is arguably more damaging long term than playing video games.
Yeah, well, my parents are like hippies, so like art is fine, but like video games rot your brain, if that makes sense.
I get you. Also, you fit right in line with all of our guests whose parents are just like, hey, you're 10, go see whatever. You want to see the Blair Witch at way too young of an age? Here's the movie for you.
But not video games, because that's not art.
Violence,
Right. So one of the things that Joey sort of alluded to earlier, you and Joey are around the same age. Joey is always talking about on this podcast how he was like barely had object permanence and doesn't remember anything about 99 and didn't see any of the movies until he was much older and all that sort of thing.
I think my count of like movies I saw in theaters that year is maybe up to 3. Like I just don't like, I think it was probably Star Wars. Maybe Toy Story 2, maybe, and then I think we realized last episode probably Pokemon the first movie, whatever that's actually called. Like I didn't experience culture as like an 11-year-old. I don't know.
So that's what I was going to ask you, Dahlia, is in creating this sort of audio essay, how much of the media that you talk about were you consuming at the time, and how much of it is kind of something that you've kind of retroactively cobbled together to appreciate like what this year was in terms of pop culture and all that sort of thing?
I think so. I was 10 and 11. I think shockingly, like this project felt so like engaging to me because I actually remember almost all of that year. Shocking. Like so many huge things happened. Like, of course, I remember Columbine. I was just thinking, like, what movies did I see in theaters? Like, I saw American Beauty in theaters. I saw the movie we're going to talk about, The Haunting.
Spoiler.
Yeah. I saw like SpongeBob came out. Like all of this stuff, I feel like I really remember. I like consulted my diary a few times, but I think part of it is that I grew up in Kansas, and I think I was just like so into pop culture because it felt like that was like the real world outside of Kansas. Was like I watched MTV all the time. I like would go to the movies as often as anyone would take me, just because it felt like, and and like obviously like you guys, like I love movies, but it just felt like that was the real world, and that was like real culture and what was happening outside of Kansas. So I really wanted to be involved in that.
What, aside from like Y2K, what do you think are the major kind of cultural shifts and milestones that sort of made this year more than just kind of a fluke, right? Because like a lot of really great movies and music and video games and whatever else can come out the same year without creating a kind of a paradigm, right? The way that this year did. So beyond like the Y2K thing, what are some of the other things that were like going on, do you think, that that led to all of that?
I really do think it still connected a little bit to Y2K. I think it was sort of widespread interest in conspiracy theories. Something I was just saying like, oh, I remember all of this stuff. But one thing that I didn't exactly remember, but I'm really familiar with, was that InfoWars launched in 1999 online.
John, your favorite show.
It's like,
my favorite show.
Like dominates culture in such a huge way.
Yeah.
And I think, some of the language, some of the sort of more like philosophical kind of nihilist ideas of like movies from the Matrix, of movies like The Matrix and Fight Club got adopted by these kinds of like philosophers like Alec, quote unquote, I'm making scare quotes, like Alex Jones, to talk about like end of the world and to say like, actually, you have every reason to be afraid of the government. And I think that really has really stuck with people, really powerfully.
I really enjoyed your episode about The Sopranos. You were saying that you watched the whole thing basically. Is it last summer? Like, so was it the summer of 2022?
Yes, that is one thing that again, I was saying, I remember all of these things. I remember The Sopranos, but I was 10 years old. And so, again, not allowed to watch. But right. I watched it all for the first time starting last year. Yeah.
So I was really into that because that's one of the shows that I also I watched over the summer while not writing my master's thesis.
The first time, or you've seen it before? Had you seen it before?
So that's the thing. So I in 99, I was in college, and I had the college friend with HBO. Like, we all had one of those. The one whose parents paid for the entire cable package, and so you'd all congregate in that room to watch. Mm-hmm. So I watched, like, the first season of The Sopranos, I think, pretty religiously. And then afterwards, like, bits and pieces here and there. I watched, like, most of the final season before, but, like, I basically remembered none of it, aside from what happens in the finale. So I it was sort of a rewatch / a first time watch, watching it again. And in the context of us doing the show, Joey, at the same time, and realizing that was also a 99 debut, and the way that it sort of weirdly captures a lot of that anxiety and a lot of that sort of, kind of looking back on the previous decade and the previous kind of century and presenting it in this really interesting way. So, without spoiling the episode, Dahlia, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you were sort of moved by with The Sopranos? It's a really moving episode. Like, I was very kind of touched by it.
Thanks. I think, have you talked about the movie Analyze This?
Not yet. That has not happened yet. No. We've talked about every other movie that you've mentioned so far, but like it was like you were basically mentioning our entire first run, but we have not gotten to Analyze This yet. That has not.
So many bizarre coincidences.
I know.
But Analyze This is a movie that I saw in 1999, which is almost exactly the same plot as The Sopranos, except like PG-13. And I, in fact, like saw it in, as a 11-year-old. And it's a mobster played by Robert De Niro, who's very depressed, and he goes to therapy. And, The Sopranos is like an elevated masterpiece, Shakespearean version of that log line. But like sort of with that in my head, and also sort of with the idea that I wanted to, because I didn't have a childhood experience of The Sopranos, to write about my actual experience of The Sopranos, which was that, again, like so many people, I was feeling like so depressed and so sad. And just in the past few years have been like so hard for so many people. And watching The Sopranos, it's just felt, again, with the idea like this is the same plot as Analyze This.
Yep.
I was just so obvious, like this is about depression. And, of course it's about depression, like his therapist is a main character, but really it is about depression. And it's about, getting too close to people and then being afraid of that and being vulnerable and being afraid of that and trying to not be depressed and not being able to stop that. And, it's so familiar to a lot of people that it felt very touching and really resonant to me watching it, and like sometimes too much. Like there was a little time where I was like, no, I cannot watch any right now because I'm emotionally volatile enough already.
When I watched The Sopranos for the first, I don't think I've talked about this because I don't think we really talked about The Sopranos on this, but when I had not seen like this podcast has proven, I basically saw nothing of consequence growing up. And so about 5 years ago, I was like, I'm going to watch all of HBO's big shows. And so I was like, I mapped it out, and basically almost exactly summing 365 was The Sopranos, The Wire, Deadwood, Friday Night Lights, which is not HBO, and Mad Men, which is not HBO, but like 5 like huge shows run around the same time-ish. I'm like, I'm going to watch them all. And I watched The Sopranos and I loved it. I watched The Wire and I loved it. I watched Deadwood and I hated it. And then I flew through Friday Night Lights because, like, especially after those first 3 shows, it's like, this is just like soap opera, brain mush. Like, I can just get through it. And I loved it, but it's like easy to get through. Mm-hmm. And then I think I hit in Mad Men something that you hit in The Sopranos. I'm like, this is depressing as hell.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like, I
can't
do this.
Yeah.
And I got through like 2 seasons and I'm just like, I can't do one of these a day. And I just sort of drifted away and I want to get back to it. And I'm just like, this is tough in a way where I'm just like, everyone's unhappy. And like, I get the whole, like, I know a lot of people like watched or rewatched The Sopranos during the pandemic, especially like early in lockdown. They're like, well, I've always been meaning to watch it or rewatch it, but it's just like, that's heavy stuff. I mean, a lot of it's also fun and a lot of it's also really, exciting and whatever, but like at its core, in a time where you're like, I don't know if the world is ever going to return to normal, this is maybe not the best thing to watch. So I don't have that experience with that show, but I have with another show, and I totally get where you're coming from. And it's sort of depressing to what you're trying to escape to kind of brings you back to a different kind of reality and just like, oh no, this is no good.
Yeah, I also like in watching it again this summer, what I think is really interesting about The Sopranos, just sort of aesthetically, is that like you can see the modern television show being born, because a lot of sort of the just sort of some of the sort of aesthetic stylistic choices of the early seasons are very like CBS drama looking, right? Like they don't look like a modern TV show, and it's not paced like a modern TV show. And then as the show sort of progresses, you sort of see that sort of style sink in by the later seasons. And it's fascinating as like a time capsule of, because like a lot of people, I think, Dahlia, you kind of bring this up in your episode, but like this is one of those shows that is formative of this sort of golden age or second golden age of television, right? That sort of shows that existed partly because DVD allowed you to like tell much longer stories. Like 24, I don't think would have worked were it not for the idea of being able to buy a whole season on DVD, because that's a show where like if you miss an episode, you're fucked. And like once you have the choice of like getting the DVDs on Netflix, you're like, oh cool, I can wait till season 1's over and watch it that way.
Well, and also like just to interject really quickly, like another thing that we've not mentioned that Dahlia, I didn't realize, but you mentioned in one of the early episodes, is that Netflix launched that year. And like Netflix is clearly a very different, but like not only do DVDs exist, but like they're just like Reed Hastings is like, hey, we're gonna make this easier than ever to get this in your house.
Yeah,
it's like the confluence of like how to make this stuff like viral in a way that like different viral than today, but like it all came together in that year. And I think your podcast does a good job of like saying, hey, here's all the parts, like you can kind of link it together yourself, but like the groundwork is being laid here.
Yeah, viral is actually like exactly the right word. Like, when I talk about the Blair Witch Project, I say like, we didn't talk about Blair Witch Project in terms of, we didn't use the word meme yet. We didn't use the word like virality about like how people were saying, oh, the Blair Witch Project is real. And like looking at these clips of, the snot crying scenes or like just the images of the little Blair Witch, that was the beginning. I think this was like the beginning of that kind of virality, because there's InfoWars is also like creating that, and the media sort of like this like gathering storm around Y2K is also creating that, this idea of viral spread. I think all of those seeds are in 1999.
And we did talk about that with Chelsea in our Blair Witch episode, about how part of what Blair Witch was like this multimedia experiment, in addition, like that only worked because of where the internet was very specifically in that moment, in terms of what they could and could not do, right, with the internet. But I remember very well the Blair Witch website and how fun that was, and like the intentional suspension of disbelief and all that stuff.
Well, there's also this year, and I don't know if we talked about it on that episode, but like whatisthematrix.com was also like a thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was. I think we did talk about that on the episode as well. And
I mean, that was a year ago. I don't remember anything.
I know, it's been so long. One other thing, Dahlia, speaking of other big things that happened in that year, I knew this a long time ago and had totally forgotten about it, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I was also like, man, it's such a great title, that it was going to be called Family Man, and wasn't, because another show that started in 99 called Family Guy would have been confused with it. And Family Man is the perfect fucking title for that show, Because that's what it's about, right? In like the two different ways
Yeah.
of understanding family, like the family, the
Yeah.
mob, and he is a guy who goes home and tries to like run his family, and it's almost sad to me that that's not the title of the show.
Yeah, it's a perfect title. Yeah, but I guess Family Guy was better, more important.
I wonder what the domino effect would have turned the underrated, genuinely Nicolas Cage movie, The Family Man, into. Like, they probably wouldn't have called that The Family Man. I think that came out in 2000, right? So, like, that would have been some other thing altogether.
2000
That's
or
like
2001,
The
yeah.
Father.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That would have been called something else. It's a Wonderful Life 2 or something like that, because that's basically what that movie is.
Yeah. And it's
Anyway.
a Christmas movie. It's good. It's a gem. Go check it out.
Dahlia, are you going to do Y2K Forever next?
You know, I actually did 1999 Forever with like the loosest plan.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't sure how far I was going to get. Right now, I think, so I have 9 episodes that sort of tell a full arc, a full story, I think.
Yeah.
I do think I'm going to do another similar project. I'm mulling over some ideas, but I don't think it will be quite the same thing. And I don't think it will be Y2K specific, that era specific.
So you're not doing Joey's idea of just moving on a year from...
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. But I also like the idea of calling a thing forever and then having it being specifically a limited run. Like,
of 1 year. Yeah.
Not forever. No,
Yeah.
no, just like
That's
these are
true.
9 episodes. Which also, our seasons are 9 episodes. Like, it feels right. Like, it feels like a nice number.
Right.
There's a lot of 9s in 1999. It's perfect.
It's true. Okay. Well, with that,
Oh boy.
Dahlia, I asked if there was a movie that you wanted to cover, and you were like, well, I bet all of the good ones have already been taken. But
Yeah.
has anyone asked to do The Haunting? And I said, no, Dahlia, no one has asked to do The Haunting. And so today, Joey and Dahlia, we are going to be talking about the 23rd highest grossing movie of the year.
That's so high.
Interestingly, right in front of fellow critical dud starring Catherine Zeta-Jones at 24, Entrapment. Zeta-Jones got the 23rd and 24th highest grossing movie of the year. The Haunting grossed $91 million domestically and $177 million worldwide on an $80 million budget. It debuted at number 1 on the weekend of July the 23rd, a weekend we've already talked about as it was the number 11 debut of Drop Dead Gorgeous. In fact, of the top 10 movies of that weekend, we've already discussed 5 of them on the show.
Wow.
Starring returning champion Liam Neeson, who you might remember from something called Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Lily Taylor, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Owen Wilson, and for no reason at all, other returning 99 champion Todd Field from Eyes Wide Shut, Virginia Madsen, Tom Irwin, and Bruce Dern, who have no reason to be in this movie whatsoever.
Wait, are you saying Todd Field of Big League Chew fame? Todd Field of Big League Chew fame?
No, director of Tar.
Tar.
Todd Field.
Yeah, no, but he also
Director of Tar.
invented Big League Chew.
Wait, did he really? He did not.
Oh.
Did he
He
really?
invented Big League Chew.
Is
Yeah,
that true?
that's my favorite fact from this Oscar. I mean, Tar is the best movie I've seen in years, but I think even better is the fact that he created the bubble gum used by Little Leaguers coast to coast.
And he's in this movie
Is he
playing a guy named Todd.
Is he like the assistant who's there for like 4 seconds? Is that who he is?
Literally, that's exactly who he is. He just takes that girl
Oh
home.
my God.
That's all he does. His name is Todd
Yes.
in the movie. He is a fantastic actor and director and Big League Chew inventor, and there's no goddamn reason why he's here whatsoever.
Okay. Sorry, I have to say, when I found out he was in Eyes Wide Shut, I like lost my mind because I love Tar so much.
Yeah.
So I'm losing my mind right now because I didn't realize that.
Wait,
About
who's he playing
is
Eyes Wide Shut?
fantastic
Nick
movie.
Nightingale, the pianist in Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh, right. Okay, yes.
The
Okay.
guy who plays the creepy piano music.
Yeah. Who gives Tom Cruise the password. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one. Written by David Self and based on the classic novel The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which connects loosely to Joey's other podcast, or one of them.
How to win the lottery.
With an unnecessarily great score by the legendary Jerry Goldsmith and directed by the one and only director of history's only true film, Speed, Jan Debont. What is The Haunting about? I am going to give this one to Dahlia this time. Joey, you're off the hook.
Wait, I did the work, though. All right, fine.
All right, why don't you team up? Joey, Joey, you do it, and if you miss anything, Dahlia can tell you what you missed.
All right.
How about I start, because the ending makes so little sense that maybe I can just lay the beginning part of what happens in this
Go
movie.
for it.
Okay. Three people, 2 women and a man, Luke, Eleanor, and Theo arrive at this is like the best part of the movie is the set, a very, very scary, creepy set, and are told scary things by the housekeeper. They have come because they think they are participating in an experiment on a sleep study, because they're all poor sleepers. But actually they are there because Liam Neeson, Dr. Marrow, is doing an experiment about fear. And there's a scene where other doctors are like, "No, doctor, this is not allowed. This is not how we do experiments." And Liam Neeson is like, "No, I'm going to do it anyway." So he's doing some kind of fear experiment in this house, Hill House. And then spooky things start happening. Scary things start happening. For real.
Joey?
So Nell, Lily Taylor, finds out the true backstory of the house, that the guy named Dr. Crane tortured and killed a bunch of orphans whose spirits now haunt the house. And she also learns that she's part of the Crane family, which, sure, okay. They all try to escape, but they get trapped inside by the ghost of Hugh Crane, which all movie long, when she's shouting Ukraine the entire movie, I'm like, is this Ukraine? But just no, Hugh Crane. Nell outbraves Hugh Crane, banishes him into a portrait, but dies in the process. Then she and all the ghost kids go to heaven. You did not mention the unbelievably attractive Catherine Zeta-Jones, the fact that this is kind of like a Scooby-Doo-esque house of mystery, sort of. And Owen Wilson's there for no reason, even though Owen Wilson somehow figures out what's going on before everybody else, which is like the least believable thing in the entire movie, that Owen Wilson sees through the ruse.
He knows everything. The whole, like, everything. He's like, "Oh, no, it's probably just a fake sleep experiment." And like, what is happening? Is that it? Is that the synopsis?
Well, there's, she's insomnia, gets kicked out of her house. Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, it's... Yeah. I will say, though, I know how much you love the Mike Flanagan stuff, and I'm sure you love this movie just as much.
It's hard.
It's all things you love.
It's like picking a favorite child.
It's there's Nell, there's Hill House, there's all of your favorite things.
Wait, you do or don't like the Mike Flanagan
thing?
thing?
Obsessively love everything Mike Flanagan touches. I love, so yeah.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, cool. Okay.
He's being sorry.
No, I think so. I had never seen this until today. I don't think it's fair to this movie that I saw this in an era that the Mike Flanagan thing already exists. Like, I don't think that it's fair to this movie. That's not this movie's fault.
Yeah.
That I've seen other like great adaptations, and then I watched this one. I also think, like, my big issue with this movie, because I think it looks beautiful, is that I don't think 1999 is this movie feels 99 in a way that a lot of the other movies don't, for better or worse, better and worse maybe, that we've covered so far. And I don't think that setting a haunted house movie in 1999 is spooky. Like, I don't think it's super spooky, but maybe I can be convinced otherwise.
All right, well, hold that thought. All right, so the second adaptation of Shirley Jackson's 1959 novel, following the 1963 critically acclaimed adaptation, also called The Haunting, began as a collaboration between Stevens, King, and Spielberg, but ultimately fell through due to a creative rift between the two. Spielberg then inexplicably hired a novice screenwriter, David Self, to craft a new screenplay for Spielberg's studio, DreamWorks. This was Self's first feature, but he would go on to much better critical success the following year with 2000's 13 Days and then 2002's The Road to Perdition. Debont took over directing duties in what would be his second-to-last feature directing gig before his retirement from film in 2012. Debont had primarily made his career as a cinematographer, most famously in America as the cinematographer for Die Hard, which helps explain why the film's few warm reviews point to its visual composition above all else.
He also shot the movie Roar, which is one of the best movies of all time, and in the process was scalped by a lion.
Was one of many people scalped by lions in that distressingly...
Do you know about Roar?
I know all about Roar. Oh, yeah.
Look up Roar. So Roar, Roar is like Melanie Griffith and her family. Like, it's a movie that they made a movie where it was like a plot where like a family was going, like the dad was like on this, like he had this house in the safari and the family was going to like visit. There's like a whole story written, but like there were like 60 or 70 lions, like, because that's just what they were around, and like other wildlife. And then they get there and start filming a movie, and they're like, oh, we can't make a movie because these are all wild animals that won't. So most of the movie they shoot is these lions literally chasing people from room to room, and people literally running for their lives from these lions. Like, Melanie Griffith required like facial reconstructive surgery.
Yep.
Jan Debont was scalped and required like hundreds of stitches to like almost every single person.
Yeah.
It's the craziest movie I've ever seen.
It is the most grossly irresponsible movie ever made. Famously.
And the good news, though, is that not a single animal was hurt. Like, when the Draft House bought and remastered this movie and they were re-releasing the trailer or whatever, they're like, dozens of cast and crew were hurt and not a single animal was harmed in the making of this film. Like, the animals were just like, fuck you, we're not going to let you make a movie in our house. Get out of here. It's wonderful. Go watch Roar, and Jan Debont shot that. So
He certainly did. The principal photographer for The Haunting was Carl Walter Lindenlaub, who got his start with Roland Emmerich, shooting his first two films, Hollywood Monster and Moon 44, and going on to shoot Emmerich's Universal Soldier, Stargate, and Independence Day. In a strange coincidence, in 1994, around the time of the release of Speed, Debont was in production on a new Godzilla movie, but left over budget concerns. He would be replaced by Emmerich, whose final film was released in 1998. Famously, the best Godzilla movie. Also, weirdly, 1999 also saw the release of The Haunting of Hell House, starring Michael York and produced by none other than Roger Corman, which is little more than a cheap cash-in ripoff, and of course another movie that we will eventually talk about on the show because we promised we would with friend of the show Stephanie Gagnon, The House on Haunted Hill, not to be confused with The Haunting of Hill House, which changed its name because of that movie. A lot of hills, a lot of houses, a lot of hauntings. Big year. Anyway, Self's adaptation was broadly similar to Jackson's story, though less faithful than its predecessor, but more faithful than the also critically acclaimed 2018 Netflix adaptation created by Mike Flanagan, which hewed close to the themes and tone of Jackson's novel while completely reimagining its premise and borrowing heavily from other Jackson works like her 1962 novel We Have Always Lived in the Castle. The Haunting was nominated for 5 Razzies, losing them all, and with 101 reviews, it has a 17% Rotten Tomatoes score and a 28% audience score, with a much more generous score of 42 on Metacritic, with 28 reviews and an audience score of 7.6, which is a real rarity that you have something that's rated higher on Metacritic than you do on Rotten Tomatoes. In this case, by quite a lot, but there you have it.
Well, like, everybody could say it's a bad movie, but still like give it like a C- or something, right? Like, it could be
right, because a lot of Rotten Tomatoes is very like pass fail. It's very like it's good or it's not. Whereas Metacritic is a much more sliding scale. Its highest score on Metacritic is an 83 from the Tampa Bay Times' Steve Persall, who wrote, quote, "Finally, a horror film that doesn't turn on the gore machine nor confuse dread with decibels. One of the most convincing members of the cast is the gloriously creaky old house that sets up the spooky action." Which, all right, fine. Roger Ebert's score is a 75, and he gave the film 3 stars, writing, quote, "To my surprise, I find myself recommending The Haunting on the basis of its location, its sets, its art direction, its sound design, and the overall splendor of its visuals. The story's a mess, but for long periods of time, that hardly matters. It's beside the point, as we enter one of the most striking spaces I've ever seen in a film. The movie often edges so close to being truly scary that you wonder why they didn't just try a little harder to write more dimensional characters and add the edge of almost plausible realism that distinguished Shirley Jackson's original novel. The movie does not, alas, succeed as a horror film, but it succeeds as a film worth watching anyway, and that is no small achievement." To which Dahlia was nodding her head quite a bit. I'll ask why in a second. Also generally favorable, the New York Times' Janet Maslin, who wrote, quote, "Under the circumstances, The Flaunting would have been a better title. This latest special effects free-for-all from Jan Debont is a lavish illustration of how to take a fairly modest black and white horror film from 1963 and amplified it so relentlessly that the sight of the flying cow in Twister would not be all that amiss. Especially notable is the work of Phil Tippett and Craig Hayes, visual effects supervisors from Jurassic Park, and the sound designer Gary Rydstrom, the 7-time Academy Award winner with Saving Private Ryan and Titanic to his credit. The very busy production designer is Eugenio Zanetti, who showed an affinity for high kitsch with restoration and what dreams may come. He does not disappoint this time." Most of the reviews hover in the 50 to 40 range, praising much of the technical aspects but bemoaning the finished product and its lack of actual scares. And among its harshest critics, Entertainment Weekly's Lisa Schwartzbaum giving the film a D and writing, quote, "The scariest thing about The Haunting is how awful it is. No, worse than awful, desperate. It's a horror flick afraid of its own audience, as lost in its own geography as the fictional film crew in The Blair Witch Project, but where the disorientation of the Blair Witch Kids leads fright lovers to a novel experience of terror and suggests an inventive new direction for the genre, the cluelessness of The Haunting, a production grounded in old-fashioned horror conventions but undone by a new-fashioned know-it-all attitude, points to the death of spookiness." So there we have it. Joey, I know that the first time you watched The Haunting was today.
Mm-hmm.
Dahlia, why did you pick this movie to discuss on this podcast?
Well, it seems that I am amongst fellow Shirley Jackson fans. This is one of the movies that I remember seeing when I was 10 years old. What's so funny is that, later in life, I became a huge Shirley Jackson fan, and, I think she's like the best. And this is such a bad movie. And I think, I was nodding along because it seemed like a lot of the themes of the reviews were like, the set is great. Yeah. You will be really creeped out by the set, and there are some kind of creepy things that happen. But I was really, I really thought the last statement about like the death of like real horror was really astute, because it is like, in the actual novel, The Haunting of Hill House, it's like what is taken from the novel like really hardly makes sense. It's like, in the actual novel, it isn't clear cut exactly what is happening, which is scary. But there is the sense that like Eleanor belongs at Hill House, and in the end she dies. Either did she kill herself intentionally, was it an accident, but she dies rather than leave the house. And it seemed like the screenwriters liked that idea, like, oh, the house wants her. Mm-hmm. But then they just like created this like ridiculous plot, like, and the ghost of Hugh Crane, that's what I was thinking about like the least scary thing is they make this like giant, like, I don't know, just like a Paul Bunyan kind of ghost character, like just like not scary, but just huge.
It's like Jacob Marley, Paul Bunyan. Yeah, it's
yeah. To be like, oh, the house wants her. And I think, I was thinking in the novel, you don't see anything actually scary. Right. And that was making me think about like in the Blair Witch Project, you don't really see that much scary either. And whereas the Blair Witch Project was able to be so successful, not showing what the witch was, or, what is exactly going on, the people behind The Haunting were like, no, we got to spell it out in a confusing way. He's been killing orphans. The orphans need help. And she's the granddaughter. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that makes sense, but I think they felt like they had to spell it out because they were not confident in their ability to make it scary otherwise, I guess.
I think the weirdest thing about this movie is that, like, and I get that it's tied with horror, but casting Owen Wilson and like kind of making it a comedy is a weird choice.
Everybody in this movie is in a different movie. Every single person is in a different movie. It's bananas.
And you mentioned before like how they make his ghost so big, and there's a moment in this movie before the ghost really shows up where I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a joke or not, because Owen Wilson delivers it like a joke, and it kind of is a joke, but also not really. But he's just like, he's talking to Nell. He's like, I'm gonna give you some peace. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna close the door, give you some quiet. And he closes the like 45-foot tall door. And I don't know if is that a joke? Like I'm closing this big door. Like look at me. Like I'm gonna give you some quiet. There's like weird things where again I think John like he's in a different movie. Like I don't know if like I didn't laugh, but I'm like I'm watching it like. Is this supposed to be a point where I laugh at like him being like, let me give you a little privacy and like closing this enormous door? Or is it just like he's leaving and it just happens to be an enormous door? Like, I don't know what the movie is trying to say or do. Yeah, I don't know. Boy, like I do want to say though, this movie looks beautiful. This house is incredible. The entire thing looks gorgeous. Maybe watch this movie on mute.
If you watch the movie on mute, you'll also miss, I think, two of the other real appeals of the movie. One, as I said, the Jerry Goldsmith score is incredible. It's so fucking good. And I'm like, Jerry, why are you working this hard? Nobody else is. But also the sound design is absolutely fantastic. I mean, all of the technical aspects of this movie are really, really, really great. Even the CGI, which by 99 standards, is very good, and works hard to be seamless. As a kind of a sort of a puzzle box, like as a work of like a ride, it's very well put together. I mean, it reminds me like when we're talking about Deep Blue Sea, right? Like the technical aspects of it are so well done. It's just like there's no movie to happen in here. Like you have to make the characters do things that are interesting and like make a story happen, and none of that ever takes place within it. But I think the sound design's incredible.
I think the credit to like the puzzle box element is that like you're basing on a Shirley Jackson story, and it's like, okay, so we have like the basis from which we're working, and this is great. Well, like, what do we do now? And everybody's just like, I don't know.
Dahlia, how did you feel about it when you first saw it?
Well, I will tell you, I think it was like part of my early love for horror movies, but there are like two things I remember so strongly. One, I remember it was wild that you got so many coincidences talking about lions. Owen Wilson's head, sorry if this is a spoiler, is knocked off by like a lion head flew in this like giant chimney, which is like the most startling thing. I mean, how many people know that happened in this movie? Like, why does he have to die? He's the only one who dies.
I got the impression that the lion's head kind of like ate his head and then spit it out.
So weird.
Like it kind of like sucks it. Like it literally pulls it off his neck and then swings back. And then when it swings forward again, it spits it out. Just like okay.
But Catherine Zeta-Jones screams and Lily Taylor looks at the camera and says, "Oh no," in this very like matter of fact, casual sort of way. Like, oh dear, a beheading just happened right in front of me. That's going to require stitches. I don't know what it's very strange. Anyway, back to you.
I think another part of like what you were saying earlier about like they're in different movies. I think that so in the novel, the character played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, Theo, is queer and like kind of comes on to Eleanor, like maybe they're gonna run away together at the end. You know, when Eleanor is like thinking about dying at the house, Theo is like, no, come with me, we can start a new life together, we'll be happy together. And so it seems like the people making The Haunting were like, oh yeah, like let's get some like Catherine Zeta-Jones like sexuality going on in this movie. And so the other thing I remember about this movie, there's a line where Catherine Zeta-Jones's character is talking about like whether or not she's afraid of commitment, and she says just like a kind of like unprompted, like, oh well, my boyfriend thinks I am, but my boyfriend thinks I'm afraid of commitment, but my girlfriend doesn't. And I remember I was like 10 years old and I was like, oh my God, you can have a boyfriend and a girlfriend? And so that was just like a light in my head that lasted for like the rest of my life. And so seeing it again, it is so fun to see she's like, yeah, like very sexy and is like talking about her Prada boots. And so I think there are moments where you're like, oh, like there's trying to be some intimacy between the two characters. That's what I was thinking when Owen Wilson is like, I'll leave you guys alone. Like, oh, because they're alone. And like there's some moments where there was like they're like kind of like making eyes at each other, but it like doesn't make any sense, hardly carries through in any way.
Yeah, you mentioned
so
that she's,
I don't know.
You mentioned that she's queer in the book, and I was gonna say she's queer in this movie too, because of that one sentence, and then like it is almost like they're almost actively like it's to cast someone who's like, look how beautiful she is. Like, we're gonna have everybody comment on how beautiful she is. It is the least sexy movie imaginable. Where like, sex isn't even on people's minds, and they understand that like you're there for a sleep study in a literal haunted house. But like, the movie's like, hey, like what could happen? Like, can't you imagine like what? And then the movie's like, no, we're not even going to entertain the idea that anything might happen between any of these characters. Other than Owen Wilson be like, she's really pretty, right? I like her a lot.
It's pretty bad.
Not good.
I do like comparing Theos though across movies and across Mike Flanagan's show, because Flanagan holds on to that as and presents that pretty well as well. But it does kind of feel like it's one of those things where it's like, well, we can't make her not queer because the source material has it, but let's just have this one line and then we'll have her kind of flirt with everybody a little bit, and like that'll work.
That like queerness means like, oh, she'll just flirt with everyone and just generally
She's
be sexy,
an artist.
and that's what it is, right?
You know how artists are.
Right, that's what she says, right? Oh, I'm an artist, but I've been distracted by love.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that this feels, when I said this before when I was preemptively jumping the gun there, this feels good and bad more 99 than a lot of, because I think that like a lot of the movies that we watch on the podcast, a lot of things that like have held up as great movies sort of are transcendent. Like they can kind of like, they maybe happen like in 1990 or 2010 or what, like there's like a range of like, who knows when it's from, but like this feels like everything good and bad about this year is in this movie, and I don't think that it works for the aesthetic it's trying to do here. So do you think it feels 99, and do you think in any way that works for what it's trying to go for?
That's tough. I mean, the only way I do feel like costume wise, I see the 90s. Like I said, she mentions Prada boots. And I think there's almost like a Casper quality to like the ghosts. Like the ghosts are sort of have these like Casper cherub faces, and even Hugh Crane's ghost kind of has like a Casper ghost shape in my mind. So there is this kind of like CGI, like what they were making ghosts look like at the time kind of quality to the movie. And maybe the 90s was that time where like movies really felt like they had to spell things out. Like I feel like that's the overall problem with it, is like just like nonstop like scenes of discovery and reading notebooks and like looking at paintings and photographs.
I think, Joey, like so kind of, I'm going to pick up on like two of the points you kind of made about this, like the question that you asked, but then also something you alluded to earlier on that I thought about while watching it. So on the one hand, it feels like the goal of this movie was to be like, we are now going to use this technology to make scary shit happen. Like we're going to like rattle the chains of CGI and like scare the fuck out of people with like, look at the way these wooden heads come to life and scream like children. Like that's going to be terrifying. And like, it's not, it's just kind of funny and ridiculous. But I kind of feel like that was the idea going in, was like, we're going to use what Jurassic Park did for dinosaurs, we're going to do for scary shit. And like, doesn't work, but I think that's what they were going for. On the other hand, again, this is a very weird story to do that with, because the book is literally the opposite of that. It's like, it's scary for what you don't see, and it's scary for what's alluded to, and it's scary because the characters are making everything scary, and that's sort of the whole point. And had this been set in like the 60s, I think it would have worked better.
Well, I think number one, I think it's very funny that you're like, what Jurassic Park did for dinosaurs, we're going to do for scary shit. And they're like, we're going to throw $80 million at this. And then the Blair Witch Project took like $12 and a pack of gum and a lack of tissues and was like, we're going to actually make something genuinely scary, right? Yeah. I think the biggest issue is this movie, like, it wants to give off a vibe of like gothic horror, and like setting that in 99 doesn't really work. I think setting in the 60s or like the hours, like in the 20s, like if you want to go back further, or like a movie like Crimson Peak, like if you have a big ass haunted house, I feel like setting it in modern, it's a weird thing. Like, you either have to like really hyper, like incredibly so disconnect it in a way and like make it feel like this is even more out of place. It just feels like they had this incredible set and then didn't do anything with it. Like, it just feels like a waste of this like entirely great set dressing in a way that could have been amazing and then just wasn't.
I think part of what makes it seem so dated is that it is a male ghost, something that I was just thinking. Like, think about like The Ring and The Grudge and like the big horror that came like just after that. Like, I don't even know when the last time I've seen like a male ghost in anything. And he wasn't scary. And it kind of does seem like, yeah, like it makes sense that like it does make sense that this was like the same year as Star Wars. Like there's like kind of this kind of, I don't know, like same aesthetic to like the creatures that was like totally abandoned once people were like, actually what we're scared of are little girls in nightgowns. And like, you know, that's what ghosts are now.
That's so true.
I guess it is like a male ghost, but actually he's like female, right? So I take that back.
No, I don't know. And also the It movies I think are bad. There was something I was going to say. What was I going to say? There was something. Oh, I wanted to ask you, so you saw this in theaters. Have you seen this again since then? Like, how many times have you seen this?
Oh, yeah.
So you say it's bad, but is this a movie that you enjoy for it being bad, or is it just something that you like hoisted upon us because you thought it'd be funny to talk about?
Well, I thought like always a good opportunity to talk about Shirley Jackson.
Sure.
I didn't know you guys were going to know so much about the Netflix miniseries, and I think yeah, it's like she's had a whole like reconsideration of her work, and so always want to talk about that. What's funny is that I rewatched it this weekend to, prepare to talk. And I realized like halfway through, like, oh, I have rewatched this multiple times and I've always turned it off like an hour in because I realized like this makes no sense. And I think what happens is that I think of it and I think of those like beautiful like again, talking about the sets, those beautiful bedrooms and like this gothic, there's like literally scenes of just like so many scenes of them just walking around the house.
Yeah.
That's the part that I remember thinking like, oh, this is a cool, fun movie to be watching. But then once you get into like the finding stuff out, I'm like, oh, I guess I've mostly turned it off at this point and just watched something else, because there was actually points where I was like confusing it with other things I'd seen. I was like, okay, the children ghosts are going to be bad though, right? Like something's going to happen, right? But then nothing happened.
Nothing ever happens. And then the ending is like, well, it's been 2 hours. Guess we're done. And Catherine Zeta-Jones and Liam Neeson walk off into the sunset. And that's the way.
So it's on HBO Max, so it's pretty easy to find and watch. If you want to check it out, I mean, you don't have to. Go watch any number of other things instead. But maybe turn it off like when CGI starts coming in. Just be like, oh, I'm good. Like, you don't need to see... Like, I think Dahlia not knowing how to describe what the end of the movie is because, like, it's not visually or narratively well explained. So I think if you want to duck out before the end, I think it's well within your rights to just, well, number one, not watch the movie at all. But number two, be like, oh, yeah, okay, now, like, computer ghosts showing up, like, with, like, weird faces and stuff. Like, all right, I'm going to dip.
Let's talk about Shirley Jackson in a couple minutes, but I want to talk a few more things about the actual movie itself and see if we can find any other bright spots aside from the score, the sound design, the set design, and the other stuff. Liam Neeson in this movie is admirably soldiering through. And what I think, like, I don't know what the fuck Lily Taylor is up to. Like, I don't know. It's confusing. But when Liam Neeson in that first scene, so it starts with Lily Taylor talking to Virginia Madsen, who's in this movie for no reason, and Tom Irwin, who's in the movie for no reason, who could have been anybody, playing her like sister and her sister's husband. That happens, so you establish that she is a deadbeat and she's been taking care of her mother and whatever, who cares? And then it goes on to Liam Neeson, and Liam Neeson has this one scene with like his professor boss guy who's like, that's unethical, and then Liam Neeson gives this like, I'm gonna explain what the next hour and a half is gonna be about, and it's so convoluted and no human talks this way. And I'm listening to Liam Neeson be like, what if we could do this, and then the thing, and then this, and you know, what you think about sleep and how people don't understand the way that sleeping and fear and I don't know, why do we fear things? What's that all about? And I'm like, Liam Neeson, how did you remember this line? Because this is just a weird paragraph that explains what's about to happen, and no human being ever spoke this way. And I really admire that you were able to get through that entire speech, memorize it, first of all, as an actor, and then also just like not burst out laughing halfway through it.
John, he used the Force. He summoned his Qui-Gon.
It is a true moment in that movie.
I just kind of think that they felt like it was going to be like a really good movie. Like I kind of feel that about the cast, you know, like this was kind of a hip.
I don't think he ever felt that way.
I want you. I'm going to still continue for no real reason to defend this person, but I want you to, you have more than one episode ripped into Dr. Christmas Jones as the worst scientist,
nuclear physicist
in that field that we have this year. But like Liam Neeson's not really that, like Liam Neeson and Christmas Jones are of a type in this year. Like neither of them should be like, when you see Liam Neeson, you don't think, sleep psychiatrist, yes, or sleep psychologist,
Kinsey.
No, but like you see Liam Neeson, especially now, and I know this is before, but you see him as like, I'm going to make the same movie where like it's taken on a blank.
Taken with wolves, taken on a plane. Yeah.
Taken on a train.
Yeah.
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 This is taken in a house, but not, it is kind of actually taken in a house.
Taken in a house. Yeah.
But he's not solving it. I do want to say one thing I did genuinely like about this movie is that Lily Taylor toward the end talks about how it's all about family, and I'm like, you know, as a Fast and Furious diehard,
what the fuck was that speech about though? Too,
I don't know, but I was like, this sounds like something that Dominic Toretto would say in any movie, and I really felt like I connected with her character in that moment because I'm like, I see where you're coming from.
I'd rather be a volunteer than a victim. Why are those your two choices?
Oh, yeah.
It seems like there's more choices than those two, aside from alliteration. I don't understand that.
You know,
the whole "it's about family" thing, where I was like, what is this movie trying to say to me? I don't like, where did that line come from? But I did think of you when I was watching.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's important. Family is important, as we learned in every installment of the Fast and Furious, and also in this movie.
Yeah,
you know, the family she didn't know. Well, I guess there is. It's effective. I'm gonna retroactively give this movie a compliment. It sets her up with having a shitty family in the beginning, and so it makes sense that she wants to find family that she doesn't hate, right? Like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not well communicated. I didn't get that while watching the movie. I only thought about it, an hour into this podcast. But,
Again, though, it's like in the novel is like, oh, there's something mysterious and unknown that's drawing her to this house. And in the movie, it's like, oh, it's because there's all these children and she has to be their mother now because it's about family. And that's what's most important is caretaking and the children. Like, it just like is, to me, feels like such a like sloppy and lazy way of articulating something that doesn't need to be articulated to be scary.
Yeah. My other favorite moment in the movie is when...
Well, what was your first favorite moment? Did you...
Yeah, that's a good...
The Liam Neeson speech where he's like, what if we could learn how fear works? And I know that it's, okay.
Do you think that this is the inception for the origin point for Ra's al Ghul, where he's just like, what if I become a mentor of Batman?
Yeah.
I don't know the Ra's al Ghul storyline. That might not actually be what
is this a prequel to Batman Begins? Maybe.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to posit.
The other moment where I was like, this is a first time scriptwriter moment was where the painting on the wall where it's like, welcome home, Eleanor, or whatever. And Catherine Zeta-Jones turns to Owen Wilson and she's like, is this like another one of your tricks or whatever? And I'm like,
this is the best line. This is the best line of the movie.
Yesterday. He's never pulled any trick on you. Why is this now a character trait of his that you suddenly know about? That doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Oh, I thought you were going to say his line, which is, yeah, with a 20-foot ladder I keep in my back pocket.
No, the whole scene's terrible. Boy, yeah, oof.
I also, like, what another thing that's kind of weird, and I understand, like, it narratively, Lily Taylor is more important because she's the one who, like, kind of saves the day in a way, but, like, we go see her origin story, right? Like, we get her in the scene with her family, and then she leaves and goes to the house. And then she gets there and like, all right, other people just showing up. Like we have no idea where Owen Wilson or Catherine Zeta-Jones comes from, right? It's just like they just show up and we just assume
they answered
like
the ad.
In a better or a more interesting movie, they might also be in on the science experiment, right? Like they might be there as like part like they might be like in like an Eternal Sunshine way where they're just kind of like they're all on the team or whatever and like they blend into the narrative or something, right? But like no, they're just also there just to as pawns, but we don't know who they are other than like hot and funny
and sad.
Yeah.
That's their temperaments.
And sad at sleeping, which is
it's the inside out of 1999: hot, funny, and sad.
Well, yeah. I mean, Flanagan, in his version, had all of the Crane children represent different stages of grief. So that's kind of...
So you're saying potato.
Yeah, so this is where he got the idea? I don't know. The three emotions, Owen Wilson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Lily Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is also like the Mr. Show sketch where it's like the 5 voices you hear in the subway or whatever, right? It's just like, but it's these 3 dumbasses.
Yeah. It's so weird though, because it's almost like everything about this movie, they had everything going for it. Everything should have worked, except that they forgot to do the movie part. And like, that's really the one place that this movie trips up. And also that like, it's not scary. I'm sorry, but like your CGI didn't scare me. And no. It's funny that it's a movie about a guy who's trying to like learn where fear comes from, directed by a guy who has no understanding of how fear works. Like it's a very weird sort of meta commentary accidentally that Jan Debont, great action director and all that stuff, but like not master of horror and fear. It doesn't work.
I think there's the wrong amount. Like if you do like less scary stuff, it'd be better. If you do more scary stuff, it'd be better. But like the fact that they choose 3 or 4 things or whatever, it's like, don't do that. That's a weird middle ground.
Take out all the CGI, all the ghosts, everything. This movie could have worked. That's what's weird about it, right? Like
Well, I think also like you said before, like, they forgot to do the movie part. It's like, yeah, once again, it's good source material that they just don't know how to adapt. Like, the story is there. You just don't know how to tell the story in a compelling way.
It's hard to tell Shirley Jackson stories, though.
It does kind of seem like they were like, as much CGI as possible. Now I'm remembering there's like a fountain that like grabs and strangles Liam Neeson in his giant hand. Yeah. Like it does kind of feel like they were like, oh, we've had this great source material for so long, and finally we have what we need, CGI, to tell the story.
Thank you, Steven Spielberg, for letting me finally tell Shirley Jackson's story the way it's meant to be told.
This is what we needed.
It's like a grown-up version of Monster House, but like it's just not. Monster House is a good movie, and this is this is not a good movie. I don't know though. Like, is there enough? Like, I go back to the Roger Ebert review, and like, is there enough really well done stuff here to recommend it? To me again, like Dahlia, I think you have the right idea that like an hour, and you've seen all the good stuff, and then it starts getting bad after that.
And all the good stuff is a generous way of framing what this is.
I think it's good for an hour. Like it's tense, and like it's starting to build up, and then as soon as it starts being like, look at her hair doing this weird thing, I'm like, this isn't good. Like this.
I think the other thing is that like I don't think it's not good enough to recommend, and it's not bad enough to recommend.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's bad in the way where it's like clunky and just is and like boring. Yeah.
Right. If it was worse, it'd be more interesting. Like if it was more inept. But like the fact that you're saying like the score is good and the cinematography is good and the set design is good, it's just like, okay, that's all. Like you let those people do a different movie. Like give them another job somewhere else, right? Because like that, I don't know.
Anyway, Shirley Jackson. Let's talk about her. Dahlia, we have, let's see, we did an episode where we talked about the two Mike Flanagan series for my other show a couple of years ago. And then I also discussed the movie Shirley with
the Elizabeth Moss movie.
With Tobin and Iselin for The Contenders. So yeah, I've talked about her quite a bit. I'm a long time fan, first time caller.
Yeah.
Joey, I know you're a fan. Was this your awakening? Was this your is this a good gateway drug to Shirley Jackson fandom for the?
Oh no, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
I mean, I think it was, although I didn't know it.
Yeah.
I think, most people's gateway is the lottery, which probably was my second introduction to her. But it wasn't until I was older, like in my 20s, that I read We've Always Lived in the Castle. And then I was like, this is the best book I've ever read.
As a Shirley Jackson adaptation, what do you think of Mike Flanagan's take on it?
I really like this. I like all of his stuff, but I just think adapting her material is so hard. And I think that what he did is so clever. And what we were just saying, like, is there anything pleasurable about watching The Haunting other than the set? And I think there is, if you like Shirley Jackson, maybe if you've seen the Netflix series, I think there is pleasure in being like, oh, I remember the who was holding my hand scene, which is the most famous scene in the novel, or there are moments that you're like, oh, I see how that's coming from the source material, which is, I think, kind of a fun little Easter egg. But then, I think so much about, I think it's just so much of her work, I think, is about unsaid fears, or things aren't always spelled out and endings are a little bit ambiguous. I think that the Netflix miniseries is so scary and so fun, and maybe in the spirit of, but not quite the same thing, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it is not an adaptation of the story, but it does feel like it is trying to emulate what works about her work and pay homage to it, right? While
for sure.
Yeah.
It's a careful study of her work and her ideas and the things that, and it totally terrified me. I loved it. I thought it was so great.
Yeah, and that most of what's scary about it is not ghost stuff. It's not image stuff. It's mood stuff, and it's theme stuff, right? And it's things that happen to the characters. That's where the scares come from, which is the way that kind of Shirley Jackson wrote her horror, which is the whole kind of concept for the book, The Haunting of Hill House, was that ghost stories were sort of all the rage at the time, and she was like, it'd be interesting to write a ghost story where you're never quite sure if it's a ghost story, where you have all these people who are all in on the idea that there's this place is haunted, but are they the ones who are sort of making that a reality? And sometimes this movie kind of plays with that idea for a little while, and I thought that was really interesting. And then it was nope, it's super haunted and a big giant machine. I wasn't sure if Liam Neeson was because in the beginning he's I'm gonna make him think it's haunted and do some weird fucked up magic shit, and you're okay,
yeah, so
maybe that's what's happening. And then halfway through he's no, it's not me, and I'm oh, okay, well it's a weird choice.
Oh, I thought it was
you. I'm are we supposed to not be sure? And it's no, we're supposed to not be sure. We're supposed to be sure it's not him. And I'm okay, so it's actually haunted, and that sort of ruins everything. But for a while there, it sort of seemed like it was going to play with the idea that maybe it is all in their head, or maybe that they are drugged. The first time that she sees the flume, and you're oh, maybe it just flew out of the fireplace, and that's why she, or Owen Wilson was banging on the door for, and it sounded spooky, and Catherine Zeta-Jones is well, sometimes temperatures drop.
Yeah.
You know how that goes. And I thought that was interesting. And then it's like, no, but then it's just a big roller coaster ride at the end. And
well, I think what a short way to say that is the issue that a lot of movies have is that it just doesn't trust its audience. Like it doesn't have faith in either itself or in the audience to like tell a story without feeling the need to spell everything out. And when it spells everything out, it takes away from its own magic and mystery and just makes itself kind of boring and predictable in a way that like it shouldn't have to be. Like if you're more open-ended about it, it's going to be more interesting and more compelling, and people are going to like it more. They might not be as set, like they might have walk out of the theater like, well, glad she's in heaven with all the other ghost children or whatever, but like I don't know that people were actually walking out like that anyway.
I did think, to your point about the male ghost thing, Dahlia, I did think that like an interesting element of this is that another movie with a male ghost came out this year that reframed what a blockbuster ghost story could be. And and I
the twist is you don't know he's a ghost.
That's true, but he's a ghost the whole time. And I kind of also think that like that's an element of this, that The Sixth Sense was a proof of concept that you could like do a sort of very psychological, very personal ghost story a la Shirley Jackson. Because Shirley Jackson has some DNA in The Sixth Sense as well, I think. And this was like, no, it's got to we got to use all the CGI to make the ghosts. That's what people really want. And maybe 2 years later, we'd have a different movie with the same basic cast and framework. I don't know.
It feels like, like it doesn't trust its audience is like the best way to put it. You know, I think maybe another point of how it is such a film, like a 1999 film, is clearly like people weren't comfortable with ambiguity. People weren't comfortable like making this kind of movie without having a more tidy ending. And they weren't ready for something like a little bit more ambiguous or a little bit more open-ended at the end. Like The Ring, which ends a little bit more like actually this whole story isn't over. Right, as opposed to like the end of The Haunting is literally like Catherine Zeta-Jones and Liam Neeson like walk out of the house like they're like like shell-shocked, and Bruce Stern says like, "Did you find out what you needed in there?" And like that's the end of the story. It's like I guess the study is over. I think there is something about like the tidiness that feels very dated in 90s, whereas now I think we're more comfortable with ambiguity, and that feels exciting and open-ended.
Because the Others was another hit that came out like a year after this, right? And again, like those two movies feel like that's what this should have been, and maybe they just didn't have the studio backing to do something like that at the time. But
it's so much money though, just to like make a bad horror movie.
It like made its money back.
It
made its money back. It was a relative
I know
hit.
that, but still, like, oh man,
I know. You could sell a movie with the Catherine Zeta-Jones at the time, who was the biggest draw of this movie. I think, right? I think her star was probably highest.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, if only because of the entrapment trailer where you have the butt gif, right? Like people know that, so.
Maybe Zorro had already come out?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right, right, exactly.
Yeah. So Zorro was 97, I think. 97 or 98. I think 97. So she
was a big deal in 1999.
She was. And then she married Michael Douglas, became a mom, and then like made a couple other movies, and that's pretty much it. Do we like her? Is she a good actor? Because I loved her in Zorro, and I love her in a couple other movies, but I'm like, are you any good? Because this is...
I don't think it's her fault in this movie.
Maybe it's not. Maybe she is one of those actors that can't do anything with a bad script. But boy, woo.
I mean, she's good in Chicago.
She is the worst in this.
She's good in Chicago. She's good in Traffic.
Oh, yeah.
She's good in Side Effects. She's good in Intolerable Cruelty. Like, she's good in things.
Yeah. What's the cooking movie with the cooking? Where she's a chef.
No Reservations?
That's the one. I like that. With
Aaron Eckhart?
the other guy. That's the one. Yep. I know what I'm talking about. Dahlia, do you like her? Are you a fan?
Well, I was just thinking about it while you guys were talking. I mean,
I haven't thought about her in so long until today.
Yeah, I don't know.
Charlie, I have maybe a easier or more difficult, but it's related. Do you find Guy Pearce attractive?
Oh, come on. Yeah. Okay. No. That's not the question. It is not. Do you find him attractive? Here's the question: Is Guy Pearce kind of ugly?
No. That's leading the witness.
Ugly.
That's leading the witness.
Oh,
that's not the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Is he a handsome man?
Oh, now or like in Memento?
No,
like,
in any point, at any point, like just through the course of his career, would you say that more often than not he's a handsome man? That's a weird way of.
In his career, he's a handsome man. Yes.
Okay, but he's also kind of ugly.
I'm not saying,
but I think he's kind of ugly too.
Yeah, because when we did Ravenous, John's like, he's a weird looking dude. I'm like, I don't think so. I think he's a good looking dude, and like you can find weird pictures of him because like in Memento, he's like not Brad Pitt in Fight Club handsome, but like he's approaching that, right? And then John came out of nowhere with this, like,
he's the ugliest in Memento. Memento is his single ugliest role. Are you fucking like that's where the ugliness comes from? Is that movie? He's not
really
handsome in Memento.
Have you seen him be Ebenezer Scrooge?
Yeah, there's that as well. What I specifically asked was, is Guy Pearce the handsomest ugly person ever or the ugliest handsome person ever? And that was my question. And Dahlia agrees with me. Let's be honest.
I think she agrees with both of us.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. I get what you're both saying. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Dahlia, a more real, actual question. What is your favorite movie from 1999?
So hard.
You cover in 4 episodes of your show, which total maybe like an hour 20 minutes or so. You cover like our entire first season and more. Like you cover so much ground, and you have so much love for so many movies. I understand this might be like pulling teeth.
And the correct American Beauty opinion, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
also you reading from the screenplay for that made me like it even less somehow. But just like I don't.
Oh, it's so nasty. It's terrible.
By the way, terrible. I don't. Speaking of Tar from before, the Tar screenplay is out there. Did either of you read the screenplay where Todd Field's like, if you read this, you might get the impression that it's well under 2 hours. If you are mad enough to greenlight this, know that it'll be much, much longer. It's just like it's crazy. Like love it. Anyway, 99.
I think my answer. I think Run Lola Run is my favorite movie.
Oh, yes. So that counts.
Yeah, I know that's an edgy German U.S. release issue.
We have covered it
already, though. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I justify it that way. Yeah. Why do you love it so much?
I mean, thinking about myself at that age, I didn't see it right when it came out, but I saw it maybe when I was like 12, 13. I think like tracing through like my interests in pop culture my whole life, like I love the Spice Girls, I love Xena Warrior Princess. Like I was always looking for like cool women in the stuff that I was into, and like maybe that has to do also with growing up in Kansas, which again is like a weird isolated place. But whenever I just saw like stuff about women kicking ass, I was like, my God, like I've been waiting my whole life. So I just thought like Lola was just like so cool. Like I dyed my hair like her. Like I would have gotten like a tattoo as a 12-year-old if I could have. Like it just felt like a different movie going experience than I think I'd ever really had. Like, I mean, it was like one of the first like foreign films that I'd ever seen, and the music is so overwhelming and the visuals and also like I think it's easy to take for granted, after like post Memento and post all of these like movies that do some flip in like the third act, that was like very edgy to do a movie where like a Groundhog Day kind of premise of like a day starting over or something nonlinear. Like nonlinear movies weren't all over the place. And then, I mean, they were starting to get cool, but just like how experimental and how, I think, unusual of a movie that is. And I love music almost as much as I love movies. And so that soundtrack is so good. And it's, it's funny and there's a little bit of like some sort of Easter egg mysteries to it, like things change every day, and how is it gonna work? And yeah, I just found her so like and there's like a cartoon sequence. Like it just seemed like made for like 13-year-olds attention spans in a way.
Maybe easier, maybe more difficult. It could go either way. Do you have a favorite movie of all time? Or a comfort movie? Like whatever, if people ask you that question, maybe if it's not the right answer, just the answer that you give.
I mean, honestly, Tar is my favorite movie of all time. Other than that, I love The Birdcage and Midsommar also.
I have like 8 Midsommar shirts and everything. I have so much Midsommar swag around my house, and I don't have anything in sight. But yeah, no.
Oh, look at that. Beautiful. Very nice.
There's this thing that went viral on Reddit where like it was this kind of like, it was a place that you can make like custom merch, and it was like all like live, laugh, love sort of like text, and someone just put in pictures from Midsommar. And so like there's it just says loving you, but it's her crying when she finds out, spoilers, that her boyfriend is cheating on her. Or like it says live, love, laugh, but it's her as the May Queen. Like it's just the dumbest, weirdest. I'm like, there's got to be Midsommar stuff in here. So I do have the coasters. Anyways, unrelated question. As someone from Kansas, do you like or dislike The Wizard of Oz?
I mean, I guess I like it. It's fine. Yeah. I mean, I know the songs. Of course, like people be like, "Oh, you're not in Kansas anymore," and you're like,
first time. Yeah, never heard that one.
I mean, I have never seen Wicked, but I probably will see the Wicked movie if that answers anything. I read it though. Oh, I have read it, the novel, a long time ago when it came out. I appreciate it's like a film classic. Like I know Technicolor. Like I know
because I could see both extremes where it's like that's like I never want to hear about that movie again because people make that joke my entire life, or it's like that's where I'm from. Like that, there's not a lot of movies about Kansas, right? Like it's that and maybe The Grapes of Wrath, or maybe that's California. I don't know where that is. But that's feels like Kansas, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's California.
Yeah.
I mean, you do like the Kansas City airport is like all like glitter red shoe magnets and like yellow brick road magnets. I definitely had like a Dorothy doll as a kid. I mean, I guess it's like Kansas is so boring, but like the plot of the movie is like, yes, Kansas is boring and one day you will escape. And so I was like, great, that's a great narrative for me. So
but you'll immediately want to go back because it's terrifying.
Oh yeah, I guess
because there's so much color and witches.
Well, when you put it like that.
Quick trivia question for both of you. Catherine Zeta-Jones and Lily Taylor would reunite the following year in a movie that is also about a morally questionable man controlling their lives. What is that movie?
I'm bad at these guessing games. Like I feel like I know a good amount of like movie trivia, and then every single time you bring up a trivia question on this show, I'm like, I don't even know where to begin answering this question.
No, I also think I know movie trivia, and I don't know the answer to this.
Is this like a big movie?
Pretty goddamn big movie, yeah.
Okay.
Oh my god.
They both play ex-lovers of the main character.
Does not help.
Okay.
I sort of assumed that when you said like a morally questionable dude, like I kind of like went to that place.
Or it's emotionally dubious character. Let's say that much.
Emotionally dubious character.
Someone with a questionable sort of compass of life, much like Liam Neeson's character in this movie, but in a different way.
What genre?
Do you need another hint?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see our faces. We are both stumped.
This movie also featured Tim Robbins and Lisa Bonet. Last clue. This movie was the breakout role of one Jack Black.
High Fidelity?
Oh my god.
It is high. It is
Whoa.
high.
Is it High Fidelity?
This is shocking.
Yeah, I've seen the movie. I might have seen that movie once. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, but Lisa Bonet was in that, and then that's why Zoe Kravitz was in the Hulu remake because it's daughter of okay,
with friend of the show Brian Silliman, who is also in that Hulu remake. So,
that is true.
There you go.
Shocking.
High Fidelity. I was watching this movie and I'm like, hey, High Fidelity. It's two of Rob's exes in High Fidelity, both in this haunted mansion because some kind of emotionally stunted asshole dude was like, I'm going to play tricks on these people. So I was like, wow, that's a weird little...
So that is very similar to that an emotionally stunted dude, although this one, you know, with the backing of science, decided to play some tricks on people. Like, it's the same movie.
You got it eventually once Dahlia started going to IMDb and being like, wait, what?
I got it once you said Jack Black. That was the key.
Yeah.
Your 8th or 9th hint. I finally got there.
And then, of course, Lily Taylor redeems herself in the haunted house movie genre some, I don't know, 20 years later?
In The Conjuring?
In The Conjuring.
Yeah.
So many, it's like so many pieces coming together. Yes.
I know.
Yes.
Yes.
The Conjuring.
Are we in favor of The Conjuring?
Yeah, I like The Conjuring.
Yeah. Why does that work as a ghost story movie or haunted house movie and this doesn't?
Because it's made by competent filmmakers.
Yeah, and you see the witch so few times. Like the scariest part is like the clapping stuff and the...
In horror movies, less is almost always more. Almost always. Or, in like the Evil Dead sense, go way out. Okay, go way all out. You know what I mean? Right? Like it's one extreme or the other. It's that murky middle ground where you don't know what you're making, where it's just like, this is not good.
Because I guess in The Haunting, it's like ultimately, it's like it is positive that Lily Taylor died and is now in heaven taking care of all of these ghosts. So it's like, oh, is it good, I guess, that this experiment happened, except for Owen Wilson, who's also dead? Like, like the house wanted her, so this is what was supposed to happen. So it's a happy ending? It's unclear.
I would have said, if you're going to spend $80 million on a movie, hire someone who has written a movie before.
Be clear.
to write the movie. I mean, I know up and coming filmmaker Steven Spielberg didn't have a lot of options when it came to figuring out who to get to write the script, but it seems
Speaking of Steven Spielberg, did not like Tar.
He did not like Tar.
Well, he would say that because of his Fabelmans.
Yeah, and he also has not heard of Triangle of Sadness, at least as of a couple weeks ago.
I thought Triangle of Sadness was a joke people were saying on Twitter, and I did not know it was a real movie until 2 days ago.
Oh, no, it's a great movie. It's a great movie.
Well, at the end of the day, don't see this movie if you haven't already. And if you have, then maybe this is a fun thing to...
Like, watch it at a party. Like, have people over and be like, it's not going to be scary. It'll be fun.
It's not even fun to hate watch, though.
Really?
Is it? I don't know. Is it? You tell me. Have you ever? I don't know. Yeah, you can skip this movie if you missed it, but you might have seen it because it was a pretty big hit at the time. So, who knows? But it was fun to revisit and talk about and have Joey watch for the first time and have not great opinions about.
Yeah, thanks, Dahlia. You really crossed.
We were going to have to talk about this movie at some point anyway. It was the 23rd highest grossing movie of the year. Like it's not a minor.
That's up there.
It's up there in an Inspector Gadget territory. So anyway, before we go, Dahlia, would you like to direct people your direction on the internet?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I am at Dahlia Balcazar on Instagram, and the podcast that I made is called 1999 Forever, and you should be able to find that in all of your usual podcast places.
Cool. Joey, it's been a good year, and it looks like you're doing something with your phone, and we're going to have an audio clue coming
I
up
saved that for the Tarzan episode. That's just a Tarzan.
Okay, good. We're gonna have another Tarzan yodel, but go ahead. Yeah.
I do want to say that our next movie is going to be the longest movie we have covered so far that does not have Tom Cruise in it. And I will also say, John, I don't know if you know this about me, but this is something that I've always believed, and not just in the last 18 seconds since I Googled it. I would rather die than do something which I know to be a sin or to be against God's will. If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me. And look out for frogs.
That was intense. All right, thanks, Dahlia. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you guys. Happy anniversary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will see you next